All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So in today's presentation, we are getting into a little bit of detail around how you can build leg strength for uphill hiking. So when it comes down to it, if you're a hiker, you probably already know that uphill hiking can sometimes be pretty tough. And realistically, when it comes down to it, I often find myself with the content and the ideas and the education resources I put out talking about breathing on steep uphills, which is a really big problem for a lot of people. Because a lot of people say, look, I really struggle on the uphills because I get really out of breath. I get really huffed and puffed. I really struggle to carry conversation. So I often find myself talking about this in the situation when we're talking about elevation. But when it comes down to it, as much as that is a really common thing, also a lot of people out there will notice that their legs are sometimes a bit of the limiting factor. And they'll notice when they go on steep up hills, the legs will get really burny. They don't feel quite as stable as they could be. They feel like that's holding them back. And whether it's just the legs or the legs and the breathing or whatever it may be, leg struggling is a really common thing. So essentially what we want to talk about today to build into this is essentially how you can build up leg strength, because it can be really beneficial for pretty much any hiker out there. Now, for the people who are in the situation where the legs are the limiting factor, and you're like, well, you know what, my legs do cook out on the uphills. They get jelly legged, they get really burny. I just don't have a good time with them. If we can build up strength through the legs, we can reduce fatigue, help them feel a bit more comfortable. We can improve stability and balance. So when we're taking those big steps, we don't feel quite as unsteady, and ultimately just increase performance, meaning we can get up hills more comfortably, quicker, with less fatigue, more energy, and just feel a whole bunch better. Now, alternatively, if someone is in a situation where they're like, you know what, I don't really get that burny leg feeling too much. I don't get that jelly-legged feeling. Really, like my priority is the breathing. Essentially the ideas in this presentation are going to be beneficial as well, because ultimately, even though breathing may be a limiting factor, if you can build up the strength and build up the performance in your legs on those uphills, that's going to take pressure off the cardiovascular system, help you feel a bit more comfortable, and help you breathe a little bit steadier. So whether the legs are the burning issue or it's the breathing that's holding you back, either way, the ideas in this presentation are probably going to be pretty beneficial. Now, when it comes down to the common approach in regards to building up leg strength for uphill hiking, the typical approach to this that you see everywhere from people I talk to online, recommendations, blog articles, podcasts, people just commenting on Facebook or whatever it may be, really comes down to two things. Number one's just doing lots and lots of step-ups, lunges, and squats. Those exercises, it kind of feels like we're really working those legs that are responsible for climbing, and just doing lots and lots of those exercises. And on top of that, just doing lots of climbing up here, stairs or hills with a pack on. They're the two big recommendations that a lot of people throw around. And in all honesty, this stuff, it definitely works. There's a lot of value in step-ups, squats, and lunges. There's a lot of value in climbing up and down with a pack. A lot of people see some pretty good results with this type of thing. But in all honesty, when it comes down to training and trying to train for a particular outcome, we can do much better than this. And this is just typical approach. Yes, it works, but we can do better. And essentially what we're going to be doing today is just talking through a way of sort of upgrading this typical approach and really just making sure you are getting the most out of your training. Essentially so we can ensure that, number one, we're not leaving significant gaps in our preparation, because admittedly, while those things can be relatively beneficial, there are a few gaps in that when it comes down to best preparing for these uphills and the rest of your hiking. And also we want to make sure we are getting the best results from the least amount of time and effort invested. And that's really important, because most hikers out there, they don't have all the time in the world to train. They want to be making sure their training is effective and efficient. And the stuff, again, it can be beneficial, but we can get a little bit more efficient than that. We can get a little bit more effective from it. So you can probably get better results from potentially a little bit less effort invested. And also on top of that, we want to make sure our training is not just honing in on this uphill section and really focused on that, but we want to make sure the training is carrying over and having lots of other benefits in other areas of our hiking as well. Not to say, these things, squats, step-ups, lunges, and squats, and climb with a pack won't benefit your hiking in other ways, but again, we can do better than this. We can upgrade this and make sure we're hitting all our bases. And that's essentially what we're going to be exploring today. So, first of all, let's talk about strength training. Typically, this is the first place a lot of people look. They're like, well, I want to build up strength in my legs. I'm going to do some strength training or some resistance training. I'm going to build things up. And yeah, this can be a really good option and is very effective here. Now, when it comes down to step-ups, squats, and lunges, in all honesty, these things can be beneficial. They can be part of the picture. But just focusing on these exercises, which I see a lot of hikers do, is really, really flawed. Because ultimately when it comes down to uphill hiking, when we're going up hills, when we're going upstairs, when we're just going up steep ascents, we use more than just our quadriceps. Now the quadriceps are the muscles in the front of the thighs. They're the muscles that get really, really burny when we're going uphill. And there is no doubt at all that they are working really, 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 really hard. But a lot of other muscles in the legs are working just as hard or relatively as hard when we're going up hills. And the issue with just focusing on step-up squats and lunges is essentially those three exercises, which are the three favorites for hikers, they really, really, really focus on the quadriceps. So we're doing quadriceps, 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 really, really, really getting those strong. And those exercises will do a little bit of the glutes, like a little bit of the bum muscles, but not a huge amount. So essentially, if we're just doing these sort of hikers' favorite exercises, we're really missing a lot of other areas which are responsible for uphill hiking. So essentially, when it comes down to uphill hiking, and ultimately any other type of hiking in general, the legs work as a whole, meaning it's not just one muscle, but they're all working together in various different ways. So essentially, when we are training for uphill hiking, we want to ensure in our strength training, we are developing the quadriceps. Yes, they are important. We want to do that. The glutes, which are the bum muscles. We've got three muscles in there: glute medius, glute minor, glute maximus. Don't really need to know those distinctions, but basically making sure we are working the glutes. We want to be working the hamstrings, which are responsible in various different ways for uphill hiking. So the hamstrings are the backs of the thighs, and you may not feel them a huge amount while you're going up hills, but they are doing their fair share of work. And also the calves, so the calves on the lower bit of the legs, which again, they often get neglected, but they do a big role in uphill hiking. So when we're looking at this picture, if we can cover these four things, it's going to be really, really, really beneficial for you and way, way, way better than just getting focused on one area. So essentially, with that being said, I want to give you a few examples of different exercises of kind of how you can kind of hit these particular areas and some of my sort of favorites. So first of all, the quadriceps. Now, this is an example of a step-up exercise, which I said, most hikers are going to be familiar with this already. Really, really straightforward about it. But essentially, I quite like this version, which is a lateral step up, where you've got one foot on a bench or a box or a counter or anything like that, and you're literally just pushing straight up and down, up and down, up and down. Really, really, really simple and really, really, really effective. Now, essentially, a few things to sort of look at this. When you're doing this exercise, it is probably going to mainly work in the quads, so that's great. Essentially, one thing we do want to look at is just making sure this leg that's not on the bench, the leg that's on the floor, that we're not just jumping up, that's not really doing the work, but it's the leg that's up here that's doing most of the work. If you ever do find like this is a bit easy, you give it a go and you're like, oh, this is a little bit, if you ever find this a little bit difficult and you want to make it easier, you can always use a bit of a lower step or a bench. So just basically reduce it down a little bit. Or if you want to make it harder, you can basically use a higher step or use a bit of weight. So realistically, some people will look at this and be like, oh, that's super, super easy. But you can just make any exercise as difficult as you want by actually adding on a bit of weight. And an example of this is an example of doing a barbell version, which you may not be able to see. It's not the biggest video, but basically in this situation, I think I've got 60 kilos on my back, and I'm just pushing up and down on a small step. And essentially that is a very valid exercise if we really want to develop legs, but it's just another way of going about things. And I put that in for reference when some people who may be more on the stronger side or the more experienced side, they're like, hey, step-ups are super easy for me. Well, we can make it as difficult as we want. There's lots and lots of different ways you can develop quadricep strength, but that's a simple example. Now, this is an example of developing some strength through the hamstrings, so the back of the thighs. Now, I often talk about single-legged deadlifts. If you've looked at my stuff for a while, I love single-leg deadlifts for developing hamstring strength, a little bit of glute strength. This is just another way of going about this, which is called a rear foot elevated single-leg deadlift. So essentially what you do is you've got your foot on like a bench or something like that, and essentially we're basically just tipping over, keeping the leg relatively straight, and then coming up and moving the hips forward. And you will notice if you ever do this, you'll get the hamstrings are working quite a bit and the glutes will be working a reasonable amount as well. Now, this exercise, if you do it and you're like, hey, this is super easy, just use a heavier weight. Again, can make it a bit more difficult. Or if you want to make this a bit harder, you can basically just do body weight. And I have a lot of my hikers start just doing this without any weight and just purely body weight. Or you can use something in your spare hand for extra stability. If you find yourself wobbling all over the shop, you can have one hand with holding a trekking pole or against a chair or something like that. Can be a decent option. Again, there's lots of exercises out there which can develop hamstring strength, but this is just an example here. Now, this is an example of developing glute strength, so strength through the bum. A single leg glute bridge, which a lot of people have probably seen at one stage or another, very popular in Pilates, very, very simple, but essentially just on the ground, you're just pushing hips straight up, squeezing the glutes and coming down. Very, very, very simple, but very, very, very effective. Now for this exercise, it does do predominantly the glutes. There is a little bit of hamstrings work as well, so it's a nice one that kind of covers a bit of both. If you do find this is a little bit too easy, if you can do like 40 of these, like I could do this all day, you can just put a bit of weight across your hips, put a dumbbell across your hips or a pack across your hips or whatever it may be. If you give this a go and you're like, oh, I can barely get up at all, you can do it 2 legs at a time and basically have both legs on the floor and coming up and down. Pretty simple, but very, very effective. And then basically this is an example of a calf exercise. This is just some simple calf raises, which again, most people are probably pretty familiar with. They've done it at some stage or another. So essentially this is just an option here where you offer a step or a weights plate or whatever it may be. You're basically just pushing straight up and coming straight down and feeling like the calves are doing a bit of work. You don't have to do this barefoot. I was just filming this without shoes on, but you can do this in shoes, absolutely fine. If you find this option a little bit too hard, you can do it from the floor, so you're not actually on a step, but you're just on the floor. Or you can do it with no weight or even double legs at a time. If you find this a little bit easy and you're like, hey, I can do this all day, just again, load up a bit of weight. In this example, I'm wearing a backpack and you can put a bunch of weight in the backpack, use a dumbbell, barbell, whatever it may be. So they're 4 really, really simple exercise examples, but if you put those 4 together, you got a pretty good little workout, which can do a lot of work, good work for the body. Now, this is an example of a slightly more difficult exercise, I guess, if you've been doing these types of things. As you progress, you can kind of sort of think, okay, there's certain options where I can actually combine some exercises. And a nice one that I quite like combining is like exercise that work the quadriceps as well as the calves. There's a few cool things you can do here. This is an example of it combining a split squat, which is similar to a lunge with a calf raise. So this where basically you go down to the bottom of a lunge and basically you're just pushing up and down on your toe. And you'll notice that, okay, number one, my quads are getting really, really, really burny pretty quickly because holding this position isn't super comfortable, but also pushing up and down, that's just another variation of a calf raise. Slightly different than the version I showed you before. It works a slightly different part of the calf, but it works pretty well. Now, if this exercise, if you sort of look at it, you're like, oh, I like the sound of that. You give it a go and you're like, oh my gosh, that sucks. It's really uncomfortable and my knees hurt or something. Probably a sign you want to do something else. If you do this and you're like, hey, I can actually do loads and loads of repetitions on this, you can add a bit of weight. And you can hold a weight, so hold a weight in your hand or put something across your knee or whatever it may be. A few options there. But that's just an example of sometimes you can get a little bit more creative with this type of thing and add other bits and pieces in. So essentially there are a few example exercises which I quite like. Lots of options to do there, but the main thing we want to think about is making sure quadriceps, glutes, hamstrings, calves, we're covering all of those bases. Now, essentially a lot of people, when I sort of show these exercises, they're like, hey, how many repetitions should I be doing? This and that. And it's, it's kind of like, it's very, very hard to give specific recommendations because any exercise we can kind of change the focus on depending on how much we load it up, how many repetitions we do, how we sort of approach it. And everyone's going to be different in regards to their particular needs. But it's general recommendation, if we're looking at uphill hiking and any other type of hiking in general, to get the best results through our strength training, we essentially want to be getting a bit of exposure to both strength training and endurance training. So exercises that are going to develop muscular strength and muscular endurance, which are 2 similar things, but they are a little bit different, and I'll explain. Now, strength, like muscular strength, essentially what that is the maximal amount of force that your muscles can produce. So basically, if you just do a few steps or a few climbs or a few repetitions of something, it's essentially the maximum amount of force your muscles can produce, which if we develop this can be really, really, really beneficial to help us on uphills because every single step we take up is going to use less percentage of our maximal force if we're stronger and essentially fatigue us less and feel a bit more comfortable, really, really beneficial. Now, essentially to develop strength, and muscular strength specifically, we develop this by doing exercises which have slightly lower repetitions and more resistance. So what that means is if in one of those exercise examples, let's say use the step up example, super simple. Lower repetitions might be choosing a weight or choosing a resistance where you can only do 5 repetitions or 6 or 7 or 8 repetitions at a time before you need a bit of a rest. And then you rest for a couple of minutes, then do it again. And essentially you're choosing a weight which will give you the challenge that actually feels relatively challenging. So in those 2 examples where I was showing the bodyweight version and the barbell version is typically done, lower repetitions because you have a lot of weight on that. Alternatively, the bodyweight stuff, you could probably do that all day. And that may not be giving you exactly the strength stimulus. So essentially when we're looking at strength, we just want to aim something that's relatively challenging, that fatigues you relatively quickly. Pretty straightforward. Now on the flip side of that, endurance is essentially the ability of your muscles to extend force again and again and again and again. So strength is the maximal amount of force. Endurance is moderate force again and again and again and again and again and again, which is pretty like, that feeling of when we're on the trail, when just going over and over and over and over. So essentially we develop this by doing high repetitions and less resistance. So again, using that step up example, we may sort of choose the step ups and say, you know what, we're going to do 15 step ups at a time or 20 step ups at a time, and choose an exercise or a weight or a height of the step, which we can do that. We get to 15, we're like, oh, I'm pretty fatigued, I'm going to rest. And essentially, if we can get the exposure to both strength and endurance in our training, if we can cover both of those bases, that's going to be really, 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 really beneficial. Now, one mistake we often see from hikers is they're like, hey, hiking, I get that burny legs. I know that that's kind of endurance, so I'm just going to train that. I'm just going to do lots and lots and lots of step-ups, lots of squats, lots of lunges, get that burn and really, really chase that. And that can be good, but I promise you, if you can get a bit of exposure to the strength side of things as well, it's going to explode your results and absolutely blow you out of the park if you can get both of those together as opposed to just one of them. Really, really, really valuable. Now, as I said, as you can train and develop both, you'll get probably the best results. Now, there's a couple of ways you can kind of do this. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but very, very basically. Now, some people, if they've got a bit of experience in regards to strength training, they may have heard of like what's called training phases, where basically you spend a certain amount of time developing one aspect of fitness, then a certain amount of time developing another aspect of fitness. So an example of here that's really, really common for people in the adventure community is they may spend 4 weeks doing kind of moderate resistance, where they're doing an exercise where they kind of do 10 repetitions at a time. And they're sort of easing things in. Then they do 4 weeks where they do the strength resistance, where they're doing the same exercises, but they add a bunch of weight, so they can only do about 5 repetitions at a time. And then after that, they do 4 weeks working the endurance side of things. So they do the same exercises, but they take a lot of the weight away, and they do exercises that'll do 15 to 20 repetitions. So they'll do moderate strength, and then really strength, and then endurance. And each phase, they'll kind of alternate between the three. Now, that works. A lot of people see success from that, and that works out pretty well. If you enjoy doing that, that's perfectly legitimate. The other side of things is, and one that I pretty much get most of my hikers doing, so I think it's just super easy, is just basically dividing your sessions. And the sense that if you basically, when you're breaking up your training session, do half strength and half endurance. Pretty simple. So for example, if you have a, say, 60-minute strength workout, you may spend 10 minutes warming up or 5 minutes warming up, and then 25 minutes of strength stuff, of the lower repetitions, more difficult stuff, and then 25 minutes of endurance. Pretty straightforward. And you can basically do that year round, and that works out pretty well. A couple of different ways going about that, but there you go. Now, in all honesty, I fully understand, okay, look, I've explored a few exercises. I've just talked briefly on strength and endurance and given you a little bit here. I fully understand that some people can take that away and be like, boom, that makes sense. I can put that into action. I can put that into a program, and away we go. But probably for the majority of people watching this, that may be a little bit difficult. And I fully understand if, you got information, but how do I actually apply it? So if you were interested in this and you're like, you know what, I do need a bit of help putting this together, I have a free resource for you, which you may enjoy. Essentially, I have a free mini course around getting started with strength training for hiking. So if you are a hiker and you maybe haven't explored structured strength training before, maybe you've only ever done those step-ups and the squats and those lunges, but never really looked at training phases or putting together a proper workout or balancing everything out, whatever it may be, this could be really, really useful for you. Now, inside the course, you'll learn the benefits of strength training for hiking. So specifically today, we're talking about uphill hiking, but there's a ton of other benefits that comes from this. You'll understand the principles of effective strength training, and I'll also teach you how to create your own strength workouts. And essentially, it'll give you clear directions and clear templates to follow, where you can basically take the ideas and put together a couple of your own strength workouts to follow along. So basically, you can take these ideas and sort of put it all into action. Now, if you did want to get your hands on that, it is absolutely free. You can go to summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. That's summitstrength.com.au/strength-mini-course. Completely free. You can check it out, and it should get you set up. So that's the training, the strength training side of things. But obviously that's very, very valuable and very, very important. But there's more stuff we can do. Now, beyond strength training, probably the best way to develop leg strength for uphill hiking is to simply practice this. This type of thing is a challenge. This type of thing cooks our legs out. So to get better at it, we can practice it in our training. Pretty straightforward. Now, as part of our cardio sessions, so when we're looking at a general training week, we want to be doing a bit of strength training, a bit of cardio, and ideally a bit of hiking as well. So basically, we can just sort of say, look, as part of our cardio sessions, we can sort of combine this with the uphill hiking. We can sort of say, look, we're going to do a session where we're going to get some exposure to uphill hiking in a way that's going to help our cardio as well. So we get best of both worlds. So a few simple options here, really self-explanatory. Stair or hills, finding a set of stairs, finding a hill outdoors, going up and down, easy enough. Maybe if you're in the gym, you could use a Stairmaster, a step machine, or a Jacob's ladder. You can use a treadmill, but most treadmills don't really have enough incline to make this quite as effective as it could be. You can if you really, really want. It's not going to be harmful or anything, but if we're really struggling, if you feel like the legs are the limiting factor, typically the treadmill can be a great cardio session, but we may want just a little bit more. Or you can even do box steps. So if you don't have stairs or hills nearby, if you don't have a Stairmaster or step machine, we can do sessions where you're just going up and down on a box or on a step, which you can do at home, really, really straightforward. Now, for these sessions, there's lots and lots of different ways going about it, but basically, the general gist of it is you set a target for your climbing. You may say, you know what, today I've got a hill outdoors, I want to go climb that 5 times, and I'm going to climb up and down 5 times. Or you may go on the Stairmaster and like, you know what, today I'm going to do 40 minutes on the Stairmaster. Or you may do box step-ups, and you're like, all right, I'm going to climb for 4 minutes of step-ups, then I'm going to have a minute rest. I'm going to do it like 6 times or whatever it may be. You just set yourself a target for climbing and go out and do it. And then essentially general rule of thumb with any type of training, we want to progress over time. So you just do a little bit more each week. Instead of doing 6 climbs, you do 7 climbs, then 8 climbs, then 9 climbs, or maybe add a bit of pack weight, or maybe go a bit quicker, or whatever it may be. Pretty straightforward, but that's general rule of thumb. Now, to take that a little bit further and how to get a little bit more out of this is if you are really, really aware that leg strength is the limiting factor. If you're in this example, as we said before, where the legs are burning, you don't feel stable, you feel like the legs get really cooked out, fatigued, it may be worthwhile considering, not everyone has to do this, but if you're in this situation, it may be worthwhile considering what we call overloaded pack climbing sessions. So essentially what this is, it's just a fancy way of saying training with a heavier pack weight than you expect to be climbing with on the actual trail. So for example, if you've got a big hiking trip coming up and you're like, you know what, I've got to carry a 15 kilo pack on my back and I'm a little bit worried about the uphills, we can basically, this overloaded uphill hiking can be like, all right, well, during my training, I'm not just going to get myself ready for 15 kilos. I'm actually going to build up a bit heavier than that. So in these training sessions, we're going to get up to 18 kilos or 20 kilos, or some people can take this much, much further, or whatever it may be. So it's basically having a little bit more weight. Very, very simple. Now, for this type of thing, few tips and general rules of thumb. Like you can take those sessions I described before and basically apply to the overloaded stuff and just say, hey, that's my goal, that's my target, I'm going to get there. But there are a few tips to do this properly. Number one is we never want to just jump in the deep end. We never want to say, hey, I haven't done anything and all of a sudden I'm going to carry 15 kilos and up and down hill climbing, or just jump into 20 or something like that. Because, this type of climbing sessions, they are relatively strenuous. They do put a reasonable amount of pressure through the joints. And essentially we don't want to just throw you in the deep end and just sink or swim and risk things going wrong. As with any other type of training, we want to take a slow and steady build. And specifically when we're looking at this building up the pack weight, we want to take a slow and steady build with your pack weight. So essentially the best way to look at this is plan this out longer term. So if you do have a particular trip you're training for, this is pretty straightforward. You can kind of say, all right, I've got a trip coming up in 4 months' time or something like that. I want to make sure I'm in the best possible position just before I go. So essentially 2 weeks before I go, I'm going to be planning to do the heaviest pack weight with this session. So it might be those 20 kilos. And then I'm going to work backwards and I'm going to slowly build up to that over these next 16 weeks or whatever it may be. You want to plan this out over long term. Alternatively, if you're sort of a hiker who is a regular hiker, you're just hiking out every weekend, this may be like, okay, I'm just going to do this for 8 weeks and in 8 weeks time, I want to be at this point and we kind of build it out. But either way, we want to plan this out long term. Essentially, when you want to start off when you're doing these sessions with low weight. As I said before, don't throw yourself in the deep end. These sessions can be pretty strenuous. They can grind up the joints a little bit. So start off with a low weight or even body weight and slowly progress. Add a kilo or 2 each week and just do a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. Everyone knows this in principle, but I want to say this really clearly. You want to do this. Don't jump in the deep end, because the amount of people I talk to who do, and they get themselves, just bite off a little bit more than they can chew and they get uncomfortable, they get sore, whatever it may be. I talk to people every single week. So take this seriously. Now, on top of that is when we are looking at this overloaded stuff. Essentially, uphill hiking, hard enough. Now, downhills, very, 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 very strenuous on the joints. And essentially, when we're looking at this overloaded stuff, when we're carrying really, really heavy stuff on our back, we want to be wary of repeatedly doing overloaded descents. The uphills, that's a training stimulus. That's good. That's what we want. But if we're doing repeated overloaded descents, this can be a little bit tricky, because for every single extra kilo we carry on our back when we're on the downhill, it puts a hugely disproportionate amount of extra force through our joints. And essentially, if we're just going downhill repeatedly with all this weight on our back, it can sometimes lead to a little bit of discomfort. So we want to be smart here. Now, one thing you can look at here is if you are using a really, really heavy pack, you can use like the water bottle trick, where basically if you're going up and down a set of stairs or hills, and you're like, I'm going to do this really, really heavy, you can basically say, all right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make sure that there's a source of water at the bottom of the hill. And essentially, I'm going to climb up the hill with my full pack. At the top, I'm going to empty out a few kilos, so it's not too crazy on the way down. I'm going to descend. I'm going to refill those bottles, and then go back up to the top. And in this situation, I can't remember what I just said there, but essentially we're making sure a large portion of the weight we're loading up is made up in water bottles. So really, really simple that way. You get the training stimulus on the way up and then just reduce a little bit on the way down. It isn't always doable, but we need to be wary of that. Another option here is, if you are doing this, you can use elevators. So if you're looking at a stair session, you could basically go to an apartment building or something like that, which just has an elevator or a lift. Go up the stairs, take the lift to the bottom. That can work out pretty well. Or you can use a stair climber or whatever it may be. So just be wary of that repeated descents. And if you don't have any of these options, or if it's a little bit inconvenient, just be smart here. Just go really slow on your descents, and make sure if you start to feel a little bit uncomfortable during a session, dump a bit of weight and don't push through discomfort. So see how you go there. These are typically done when we're looking at this overloaded stuff as lower intensity sessions. Stair and hill climbing, there's lots of different ways you can go about it. Sometimes we can be like slow and steady, low intensity, and just concentrating, going on a pace where you can breathe through your nose. Sometimes you might be like, hey, I want to do this really quick and get really huffed and puffed. You push the speed or whatever it may be. If you are overloading these sessions, stick to lower intensity. So a simple rule of thumb that I like my hikers to do is do these sessions at a pace where they can constantly breathe in and out through their nose. It's just a nice measure of intensity, holds them back in regards to speed, so they can just be nice and slow and tense. And this type of session, when we're looking at the major overload, so if we're adding extra 5 kilos or 10 kilos on top of our normal pack weight, whatever it may be, don't do this on your hiking. For your hiking sessions, when you're actually out on the trail doing hour after hour after hour, just keep to your normal pack weight as a maximum. That's what I like my hikers to do. You don't want to be absolutely overloading those sessions too much, because number one, it can take a lot of fun out of the actual hiking, which is what we enjoy as hikers. And also number two, you don't want to be in the middle of nowhere and absolutely exhausted if something goes wrong. So these major overloaded things, they're separate cardio sessions. They're 40 minutes going up and down a hill in your local neighborhood. They're not in the middle of nowhere on the middle of your hikes. So keep them separate when you are absolutely overloading things. So putting this together, so we talked about strength training, we talked about this hill climbing. How do you put this together in a week? Now, strength training, as I said, is great. I typically recommend aiming for maybe twice a week for most hikers. This may be for some people who have lots of time, 2 60-minute sessions in a week. For some people who are really, really short on time, this may just be 2 20-minute sessions in a week. But twice a week is a nice thing to aim for. Some people can do more if you have more time. I have a lot of my hikers doing 3 or 4 times in a week because they have the time to do it and they enjoy it. But typically I recommend twice a week. Now, with the strength training, make sure you are training the legs as a whole. You're not getting that tunnel vision, just focusing on one area, but we are training the body as a whole. And if you can, try to train that strength and endurance together. It really, really goes a long way. Now, for the specific climbing sessions, they can go a long, long, long way and really complement the strength work you're doing. I typically recommend people just do this once a week. Some people are like, hey, I saw a hill session. How many times a week should I be doing it? In all honesty, once a week is typically fine. If you do have more time in your week to train, absolutely do some more cardio and do other types, but stick this elevation stuff maybe once a week because you don't need to be doing it multiple times. So if you have other days in the week, you might just do some flat pack walking. You might do some other walking sessions. You might cycle. You might do some intervals, whatever it may be. Just other types of cardio if you have more time. Now, this type of stuff, it isn't too complicated. All of this is relative common sense, but it's just a little bit of an upgrade from the typical approach. And ultimately, if you want to get the best results from this, it just takes consistency. You're not going to see magic results in 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, but if you can string together 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 12 weeks of these types of ideas, you'll see a dramatic improvement. Consistency is key. Now, hopefully that does give you some insights into how to improve, says core training there, wrong slide, how to improve your uphill hiking, leg strength for uphill hiking. And hopefully that just fills in a few gaps, which I commonly see for a lot of people. It just gives you a few little bits and pieces. Now, ultimately, if you do struggle with this type of thing or anything else out on the trail, and you do need a bit of help putting this together, if you're like, okay, that makes sense, but I still don't really know how to put this into a training plan. I don't know how to plan this out long term or build out workouts or whatever it may be. If you fall into that, you'd like a little bit of help, I would love to chat with you. Now, essentially what we do through Summit Strength is we offer personalized training programs for hikers to help them get fit, strong, and resilient for their adventures. Now, essentially what our packages include is we will create a custom and personalized training program to get you ready for anything the trail may throw at you, which is going to personalize around you, your needs, your preferences, and your situation. We'll also educate you on all the different peripheral factors which can make or break your adventures. Things like nutrition, recovery, self-care, mental strength, pain management, and a bunch of other things. And also give you the coaching, support, and accountability to keep you on track through what's going on. So essentially our packages are very, very comprehensive. We'll cover all of those things and really just give you everything you need to get in the best possible position for your adventures. Now, if you did want to find out a little bit more about that and see if and how one of our programs may be right for you, essentially all we need to do is go to summitstrength.com.au/online. On there, there's a big video which talks through our programs in a bit of detail. And if that does sound like something you want to explore a little bit further, on that page, you can book a call with our team. We can have a bit of a chat, really dive into your situation, find out your goals, your situation, and ultimately just find out if we can help you. And if it does sound like we can help you, then we'll talk you through one of our packages which may fit your situation, and we can decide if it's going to be right for you. But if you did want to find out a little bit more, go to summitstrength.com.au/online and we can take it from there. So with that being said, I really do hope you've enjoyed the presentation. Hope it gives a few ideas, and I hope it helps a lot of hikers out there get much, much more comfortable on those uphills and help those legs feel way, way better on the steep inclines. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon. Bye.